Okay, the microphone is working. Okay, alhamdulillah. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa nusalli wa nusallim wa nubarak ala Sayyidina al-Awwaleen wal-Akhirin, Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Inshallah, we will continue نقرر مع قراءتنا عن الموضوع العقائد الإسلامية من شهادة الإسلام لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله. We have been reading from or have been studying for, this is our, I think, 10th or 11th session now. So we have been studying the topic of aqidah, or the plural aqa'id, which is studying the beliefs of the Muslims. What does a Muslim believe? Ma yu'minu bihi wa yakfiru bihi. Right? What is it that we are required to, as Muslims, to believe in, and what are we required to not believe in? And we gave the example, مثلا لازم نؤمن بالله وحده. We have to believe that Allah Ta'ala is one. ونكفر عن الفكرة أنه عند الله ابن. We reject the idea that Allah Ta'ala has a son. So this is, of course, based off of the matan al-aqa'id al-thamanuna ala shahadat al-islami la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So it's from a text by a Libyan scholar who explores the idea of looking at the topic of aqidah or creed or beliefs min al-jiha, from the perspective of the shahada, or actually of the shahadatay, the two shahadas of Islam, of there is no God but Allah, la ilaha illallah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, wa Muhammad Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam. So now he's going to continue with a section about ru'yatullah. Can a person see Allah Ta'ala? And so this question is posed بشكل عام. So it's given like as a kind of mutlaq. It's like an open-ended question. Can you see God? Like in English, as we would say. So yumkin, like we would say, there is a potential for the human being to see Allah Ta'ala. It just depends on where you will see Him. So as he says, the agreement is that the mu'minun, inshallah, they will see their Lord, hum yarawna rabbahum fil akhirah. And so this is part of the jaza, wa ba'dul jaza wa thawab bil iman fillah, right? This is part of the reward that Allah Ta'ala gives the righteous, that in the hereafter they will be able to see Allah Ta'ala in the hereafter. There is a disagreement upon a visage, a ru'ya of Allah Ta'ala in the dunya. Now, what is agreed upon, right, the al-muntafiq, the agreed upon part is nobody can see Allah Ta'ala by their own volition. I cannot decide today, I want to see Allah Ta'ala, I am going to see Allah Ta'ala, and I see Allah Ta'ala. No. La yumkin mustahil. This is something that is impossible, that can happen of one's own. Similarly, we cannot see any of the al-ghayb, al-ghaib. Like for instance, we cannot see the malak and the jinni, the malak and the shaitan that is each one of us. So each one of us has an angel, and each one of us has a shaitan or a devil. And we cannot decide, I can see them. No, this is not something that is possible. We do believe that there are aspects or elements of the unseen that have been viewed in this life. مثلا, when Sayyidina Jibreel Zara and Nabi alayhi salatu salam, Jibreel, he came to the Prophet ﷺ, وَهُوَ وَرَاءَ الصَّحَابَةِ, he was with the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and this is in the famous hadith, we call it Hadith Jibreel alayhi salam, in which, of course, he taught us about the qawa'id, like the basics of our religion, about iman and ihsan and taqwa and so on and so on. And so he appeared in the form of a man, and yet it was still Jibreel. When the Quran says that وَرَآهُ فِي الْأَفْقِ الْمُبِينِ, that he saw him on the horizon, this is where the Prophet ﷺ saw Jibreel in his true form. So Allah Ta'ala gave the idhn, he gave the permission or the ability for the Prophet ﷺ to see him. We cannot decide, today I want to see Mikael, I want to see Sayyidina Jibreel on my own. No. So when we say that it is يمكن يرى الملائكة في الدنيا, that it is possible to see the angels in this life, what we mean is that there are scenarios under which it verifiably has happened, but it's not something that people can elect to do on their own. So it says من الجائز لا يقبل رؤية الله تعالى في الدنيا والآخرة, that it is simply because a thing is rationally or technically possible doesn't mean that it is. So we gave the example. Can Allah Ta'ala هل عند الله القدرة أن يخلق, can he create a four-sided triangle? Some people will say لا يمكن, مستحيل. Nothing is impossible. As we say, if Allah created a four-sided triangle, then how would we recognize it? Because we have no ability to recognize such a thing, being that we live in three-dimensional space, and so we can only see three-sided triangles. We cannot see a four-sided triangle. And simply because we could say, okay, this is a possibility for Allah Ta'ala, does not mean that Allah will fulfill every single possibility. And so we had talked about that in the previous one, is that because a thing can happen, Allah Ta'ala has no wujub, he has no obligation to make it happen. So mathalan, we said that the creation of good and evil. Now, naturally, human beings can accept the idea that Allah Ta'ala huwa yakhluqu al-khayr, that Allah creates good. But sometimes human beings struggle with the idea, وَهُوَ كَذَلِكَ يَخْلُقُ الشَّرَّ, that Allah Ta'ala creates evil. And they will, in an attempt to protect Allah Ta'ala, to like a sort of tanzih, they try to make a kind of protection of Allah Ta'ala. They will say that Allah Ta'ala creates good, but He's not responsible for the evil. No. We know from Surah Al-Falaq, where Allah Ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ. So Allah Ta'ala Himself states that He is the creator, هُوَ خَالِقُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Allah is the creator of everything. But, as we made the distinction, al-farq بَيْنَ مَا يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ وَمَا يَأْمُرُهُ, right? Between what Allah commands to be and what Allah allows to be. The difference is, Allah creates good and He creates evil. وَلَكِنْ لَا يَأْمُرُ إِلَّا يَأْمُرُ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ. Allah Ta'ala only commands, though, to that which is good. So He doesn't command to evil. So He will not tell us to make zina or murder somebody, or that is not permissible for us to believe in. But can somebody murder somebody? Can Allah create the situation of which a person can be murdered بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ, right, without any justification to do so? Yes. And so we said that's a very important distinction. And so this is where we learn in the study of aqa'id, because we said sometimes the study of aqidah, it can get a little complicated. If we just really take a step back, what is it that we want to accomplish? ما هو الصدف أو الغاية أو المقصد بدراسة العقيدة? What is the goal that we're trying to get? Is that, of course, we want to know what to believe in and what not to believe in, but most importantly, once we know that, Now we want to focus on what it is that Allah Ta'ala commands to, and so that we accomplish His commands, lil ajr, right? For the reward of doing them, and that even lin nafyi, right? When we deal with those things, when nafyi, when nahi, the things that Allah Ta'ala either prohibits or does not allow, even in then there is a ajr sometimes for doing it. So like Allah Ta'ala forbids zina. حرم الله الزنا مثلا. Allah forbids to make fornication. If a person نهى النفس عن الهوى, right? If a person resists that temptation, then inshallah بفضل الله فيه أجر. Then there's a reward for doing so. So that's really, it's not just that we want to have a list of the halal and the list of the haram. We want to know the list for sure. But there are في مقاصد فوق ذلك. There are things like above that we want to try to achieve. And so as he says, فَيَرَاهُ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ بِأَبْصَارِهِمْ, that the believers in the hereafter, they inshallah will see Allah Ta'ala. And so they say, فَرُؤْيَتُهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ جَائِزَةٌ. And so it should not be a source of contention for people to argue about as to whether or not Allah Ta'ala will be seen in the hereafter by the believers, that it is, as he says, ja'iza, it is a permissible and a reliable thing to take. And so, now there is a difference, يعني في tabaqat, as you could say, there are like kind of levels in the hereafter, just as we know there are levels to Jannah, and there are في tabaqat للمتقين. There are levels of the pious. Some people are pious, some people are really pious, some people are incredibly pious. And so based upon that, as he says, فَتَكُونُ زِيَادَةُ الرُّؤْيَةِ وَفْقًا لِلْأَفْضِلِيَّةِ الرَّاعِي. So it will also depend on a person's level of piety, which should encourage us that if we seek to be pious, inshaAllah, and nasallah and ajalna min al-muttaqeen, inshaAllah, if Allah makes us from that, then inshaAllah we will have an even greater, inshaAllah, أعظم رؤية لربنا في الآخرة. We can have an even greater visage of that. Okay, so now he's going to talk about some things that he's going to give some adillah, he's going to give some proofs from the Quran. So for instance, مثلا in Surah Al-Qiyamah, Allah Ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَجُوهُ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ, that their faces on the Day of Judgment, meaning the faces of the pious people, will be ناظرة, they will be shining, right? They will be shining. بها ناظرة, while they are looking at their Lord. So this is a confirmation of that. And then of course there is the hadith in which the Prophet said that وقال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام أنكم سترون ربكم عيانا كما يرون هذا القمر, that in the hereafter, indeed you will see, speaking to the believers, you will undoubtedly see your Lord directly, like with a firm visage, كما ترون هذا القمر, in the way that you see this moon, right? The moon, the way, and he said, لا تضامون في رؤيته. You don't have to struggle or make an effort to see the moon in the same way. You will not have to struggle to see your Lord, inshaAllah, in the hereafter. And then he talks about likewise, right? Al-aqas lil-kufar wal-lil-mujrim. So when Allah Ta'ala mentions that there will be the opposite for those that rejected his message, those that did not believe in him, he says, أما الكفار محجوبون عن رؤيته تعالى, they will be veiled from being able to see. So this is actually, some of the ulama have said that there are في أنواع للعذاب في الآخرة. There are like many different types of punishments in the hereafter. Some of the ulama have said من أعظم عذاب في الآخرة هذا هو الحجاب على الكفار في الآخرة. That some of the most, you could say, some of the greatest punishment that some people will face in the hereafter is that they will never be allowed to see Allah Ta'ala. So if you think about the psychology of the human being, some people will believe, some people will not believe. But deep in every human being's, fitrah, deep in our psychology, is this هذا السؤال مهم من أنا ومن أين أنا, like who am I and where am I from? And we don't mean like, oh, أنا من السعودية, أنا من أمريكا, no, we mean like really ultimately, where am I from? Where are human beings from? Where is life from? Like we have these huge questions, whether we want to admit them or not. It's deep inside of us. And so we long to know this question, like it's a deep, ishq, like raqba. We have a deep, deep need to know this question. And so one of the greatest rewards for the muttaqeen is that they will see their Lord, which in itself, huwa jawab li ay su'al. It's like it answers all questions. By being able to see your Lord, alladhi, khalaqaka, you get to see the one that created you, that made you from nothing, that brought you into existence. That in itself will be such a tremendous reward, that this is why that we will have this tuma'nina, like we will have this mutma'inna, we will have this sakina, we will have this tranquility, because finally that deep answer that we've always wanted to have the answer to. We know the answer, inshallah, as mu'minun now. We know the answer, as we say, harfan. Technically we know the answer. But on that day, we will know the answer in a way that will literally, like a person who is starving, it will like satiate that person. And so for the kafir, وَنَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ, right? For the kafir, they will be deprived of that ru'ya, which in itself is a terrible, imagine you will, on the day of judgment, you will be brought out of your grave. You will brought before Allah Ta'ala naked. Your book will be brought out for you. You will be judged. In the case of a kafir, you will be judged justly, but obviously the outcome, al-aqiba, al-iqab, not very good. And then you will be flung into the fire. Imagine like if you go to jail, right, or you committed a crime, you get arrested by the police, they take you to jail, out of the jail to the courthouse, you go before the judge, he sentences you, you look at the judge. And to amam al-qadi, right, fil mahkama, you're like in front of the judge, they give you the sentence, 30 years, life, whatever, right? You see your judge, and then you go off to prison. But for the kafir on the day of judgment, they live their whole life. No, Allah is not real. No, the day of judgment is not real. On and on and on and on and on. And then you will be brought back to life, judged and condemned to a punishment of fire and smoke and all the other things. But you never get to see the face of your judge. That's terrible. That's a terrible form of punishment. This is why Allah Ta'ala is perfect for reward. Nobody rewards like Allah Ta'ala rewards, and nobody punishes like Allah Ta'ala punishes. He knows that this form of punishment, to deny, right? رَدْ عَلَى رُؤْيَةِ وَجْهِهِ سُبْحَانَهُ, to deny a human being the visage of him in the hereafter. Nas'Allah al-afiyah. Right? We ask Allah just to forgive us, and that we never face this torment. So he said, yes, أما الكفار محجوب عن رؤيته تعالى لقوله تعالى كلا أنهم ربهم يومئذ لا محجوبون. This is from Surah Al-Mutaffifin, that Allah Ta'ala says, no, indeed, that they on that day, they will be veiled from their Lord. They will not, Allah Ta'ala sees them, but they will never be able to see their Lord. So he says, أما في الدنيا فجائزة عقلا ممنوعا شرعا لغير النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام والحديث النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام لن تروا ربكم حتى تموتوا. So he says that on one hand, there is no rational reason why we should believe that a human being could not see Allah Ta'ala, but rather Allah has not given the permission for it. And so it is. This is something that is restricted to the Anbiya, and a lot of the scholars say that whatever ru'ya that the Anbiya that they had, like for instance Musa alayhi salam, they say this is like ru'ya, ru'yatul qalb, ru'yatul qulub, like fi qulubihim alayhim salam ajma'in. This is something that the prophets that they had in their heart, but ليست بالبصائر, not like ocular. And again, this is something that we should not fight over or argue over, but rather he's just giving the adillah for this, the proofs for it. And so he mentions that what the Prophet ﷺ told his ummah, you will not see Allah Ta'ala until you die. So you have to face the trials of this life. We have to face the trial of the grave. We have to face the trial of the qiyamah, of the resurrection, and all that. And then, بِفَضْلِهِ وَرَحْمَتِهِ inshallah ar-ru'ya. Then by His permission, inshallah, we will be able to do so. The next thing that he wants to talk about, that is part of the aqa'id, or the beliefs of the Muslims, is this idea of, he says, نفي تأثير بين الأشياء بالقوة المودعة. Now this is kind of like, the ulama are very intelligent, so sometimes they write things in a way that is, you have to put on your thinking cap. The very simple way, especially to express this in English, right? So this is one of the creeds or beliefs that we have, is that we do not believe that objects in and of themselves possess any power. This is why, for instance, as Muslims, we affirm the supernatural. Right? This term in English is important because sometimes supernatural and superstitious are conflated. Oh, those are the same thing. Supernatural, believing in something like in English, because of the structure and the etymology of our language. So for instance, in English, if you go to the jadr, right, you go to the root of this idea, is that we don't believe that things can have any inherent power in of themselves, and therefore we do believe that there are things above nature. That's the meaning of super. Super from supra. Supra just means above, right? It means above. And then nature, the word nature is actually a very problematic term in English. We refer to nature as like the created world. And in fact, once upon a time, creation was a much more preferred term because, even just 50, 100 years ago, people were more inclined to the fitrah. They were more inclined to iman. Whether they were, Muslim, Nasrani, Masihiyya, Buddhi, whatever their religion was, they inclined more towards a religious explanation of reality. So they referred to it as creation. But through the forces of ilmaniyya, like the kind of secularization which has also had an impact on Muslims. Now we favor like at-tabi'a, something that is born, or, I mean, that's really the meaning of nature, is something that is born. It comes from the Latin, from nasi, that means to be born. And they have this idea that somehow like the world itself was born. No. We believe that the world and everything in it was created by Allah Ta'ala, and it was created ultimately. This is what we call it, is hadith. It is something that is temporal, meaning once upon a time there was nothing, and Allah Ta'ala brought it into existence. So because of that, we believe in the supernatural. We believe there are things beyond the world of alam al-anam. We believe things that are beyond the world of bashariya, of human beings. So for instance, مثلا al-malaika. We believe the angels are supernatural. They are, they're the ashab wal-ahlas as-sama. They are the residents of the heavens. This is above the natural world. But superstitious is like as kids, if you're walking on the sidewalk, don't step on a crack, you'll break your mother's back. And we have all these stupid rhyming things. Or like Friday the 13th. Oh man, if there's a Friday and the day of the month is 13, oh, this is bad luck. If you break a mirror, bad luck. This is like like a bad luck. This we absolutely reject. So nufarriq bayna, we distinguish between supernatural and superstitious. This is important because this idea of denying that just objects, there's no power in objects. Allah Ta'ala is the one, huwa mudabbirul amr. Allah Ta'ala is the one that conducts the affair of His creation. Nothing happens except that He decrees and allows and brings it into existence to happen. And this is an important distinction. So he says, فَيَجْبُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِ أَنْ يَعْتَقِدَ أَنَّ الْمُؤَثِّرَ الْحَقِيقِي فِي الْأَشْيَاءِ هُوَ اللَّهِ. We believe ultimately that when we see something happening or something existing or whatever it is, we don't believe that there is any power in that thing of itself, but it is, we attribute ultimately it to its sababiyya, or its cause or its effect. This is something that is governed by Allah Ta'ala. فَلَا تَأْثِيرَ بَيْنَ الْأَسْبَابِ وَالْمُسَبِّبَاتِهَا. We don't believe that there is some sort of special relationship between cause and effect, right? Or that there's some type of link between them. But rather, we directly ascribe the hukum and the sultan and the tadbir, right? The authority, the rulership, and the management and the maintenance of creation, we ascribe it completely and solely to Allah Ta'ala. And so, an example of how this can sometimes be made an exception, he says, فَلَمْ يُحْرَقْ إِبْرَاهِيمُ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامُ رَغْمَ إِلْقَائِهِ فِي النَّارِ. So for instance, we know the qissa of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. We know the story of Abraham when he was thrown into the fire by Nimrud, and Allah Ta'ala gave the amr, the command that the fire would be cool. Now some will say, oh, this has to be like amani, this is like a fairy tale. No, fire does not burn because it possesses some quality of burning. It burns because that's what Allah Ta'ala decrees. And that, generally speaking, in the world of human beings, this is something that we would, and there's some disagreement about the mustalaha, or the terminology. Some will call this the sunnatullah. Some will call this fire is hot and burns as a sunnah of Allah. But Allah Ta'ala is not restricted by His own sunnah. We are restricted by Allah's sunnah, right? When it's cold, things freeze. When it gets hot, things catch on fire or they melt. And there's nothing that we can do about that. But if Allah Ta'ala wants to arrest His amr, His command, that fire will be hot, then this is something that He has the prerogative to do. وَلَمْ تُقْطَعْ رَقَبَهُ إسماعيل عليه السلام رغم إمرار السكين. So the sakin, when, for instance, Ibrahim alayhi salam was going to sacrifice his son. Some have tried to say, oh, well, this is a dream, this is an analogy. Okay, theoretically, this is one explanation. But we do not need to have that by way of explanation if you're saying, well, you know, whenever a knife is on somebody's throat, if you cut it, they will bleed to death because these are the rules of nature, or this is the rules of science. Allah Ta'ala is the ruler of all creation. So this is why in our intellectual history, there have been these sort of like arguments or these types of disagreements, because some people have tried to say, well, because Allah Ta'ala has created things a certain way and He never infracts them, He never changes them, then we should interpret it by way like some sort of ta'wil to make it like majaz or some type of analogy. Others will say, no, Allah Ta'ala is not restricted by His amr or His qada. So for instance, Allah Ta'ala has said what? Kataba rahma ala ghadabi. I have prescribed that my rahmah, that my mercy will supersede my wrath. Walakin al-ma'na, right? The meaning is, it does not mean لا يعني أن الله لا يعذب. Because Allah Ta'ala has determined that His mercy will go first, so to speak, or He favors His mercy over His wrath. This does not mean that Allah Ta'ala will كأنه لن يعذب. It doesn't mean that He will never punish. He will punish. This is also wa'id, right? Al-maghfirah wal-adhab, both the forgiveness of Allah Ta'ala and the punishment of Allah Ta'ala, huma wa'id. They're both a promise from Allah Ta'ala. And so He gives a couple others. He says, وَلَمْ يُحْضَمْ يُونس عليه السلام رغم ابتلاء الحوت له. So for instance, when Jonah was in the whale, he said, normally if you go inside, if you were inside a whale, it would digest you. Like you would be eaten by it and digested. But Allah Ta'ala commanded for him to only be swallowed, but not to be digested. And so he gives some other examples of that. And so he said, for instance, though there's a strong statement. فمن اعتقد أن لتلك الأشياء تأثيرا بواسطة قوة أودعها الله فيها فهو فاسق مبتدع. So if a person believes that things have powers of their own and that Allah Ta'ala sort of like puts them in it and then walks away and then they now have power on their own, no, he says this person is a fasiq, they are deviant, and that they are mubtadi', they have invented a sort of new thing. Because the ulama have always been firm that Allah Ta'ala kulla yawmin huwa fi sha'n. Like Allah Ta'ala is always responsible and alone, wahdahu, alone conducts the affairs of existence. Now, if somebody were to hold such an opinion, he called them a fasiq, and he called them a mubtadi', they're an innovator. He says, fi takfirihim qawlan. But so, okay, in the case of that, what do we do? There's two ways to handle it. He said, أرجحهما عدم تكفيره. The more stronger opinion is that we do not make takfir of a person, but we do say that the belief that they have is incorrect. And so the Shaykh here is also trying to be, he's trying to kind of give us a little bit of caution of wanting to, especially when it comes to the mahal of aqeedah, like the field of aqeedah, sometimes people immediately jump to takfir. Oh, you believe this and it's wrong, anta kafir. And it's like, no, you can be wrong, but you don't have to necessarily be considered a kafir, as if we would not give you janazah or something like this. We should not go, to extremes. Okay, the part that I wanted to really touch upon for this is that you take, for instance, especially this part about things having power in and of themselves. And so if you go back, in enough time, a couple hundred years, 1,000 years, even though we as Muslims, we believe in sihr, we believe in there's something called magic, but it's not the Hollywood type of magic, like a sorcerer in a castle and this kind of, this is just nonsense. This is for entertainment. But people were very superstitious back in the day. And one of the things that I see in the modern context, that people behave as if they are mashoor, as if they're mutasahhir, if they're people that are affected by sorcery, is actually the ta'athir min technologia. It is the effect of technology. And I say this, like, if you ask a person, like, here's this iPad, right? Nice shiny screen. How does this thing operate? 999,999 people out of 1 million will have no idea. I don't. I have no idea. I know that it has electricity and it has a battery, but how does this work? I cannot tell you how it works. I used to work, I worked as a software developer, and I still cannot tell you, like, fundamentally, like aslan, how does it work? So this technology today has become so sophisticated that in many ways it almost is like a kind of superstition. And so there was a very interesting Christian, I guess he comes out of the Christian tradition. There was a very interesting science fiction writer who also wrote kind of in the field of religion in the West. He came more from a Christian background. And he said something very astute. He said, any sufficiently sophisticated or advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I'm telling you, for people today, this is indistinguishable from magic, and the effect of it is virtually indistinguishable from magic, right? So it isn't literally magic, but its effect is very nearly like what we believe magic can do. So, like, as Muslims, what do we believe about magic? Again, we're not talking about Dungeons and Dragons and all this type of stuff. That's something that's Hollywood. But we do believe in a type of sihr in which a man can be affected in his affections, or a woman, or vice versa, right? You can make somebody fall in love with somebody, out of love with somebody. You can affect them in that certain kind of way. This is exactly what this kind of stuff does. And so I personally, the reason why I'm saying this is because I believe that it's extremely important for Muslims today to actually study their aqa'id, to study the foundations of the beliefs in their religions. Because it's like, on one hand, we say we believe in Allah, but then this thing acts like it has some sort of supernatural, magical power over us. It's very disturbing what these things are able to do today. And so, especially because increasingly we are completely ignorant of how these things operate. So they're built by a few kind of, mega corporations, and the how-to is very clandestine, it's very secret, we don't really understand it, and yet it's everywhere. A toddler, 2 years old to 102 years old everybody has these things. And so we need to understand that Allah Ta'ala is truthfully in control of everything. So you cannot believe, oh, Allah controls the universe, but this technology stuff is like something separate or something different, right? If you take my meaning. And so that, I'll put a few notes up on the website if people want to go, because I know it's a little bit kind of like cerebral, a little bit intellectual, but I think it's something just important for us to think about, right? In which he said that modern technology has actually in some ways revived modern human beings' interest or given them experiences like what they used to get through either traditional religion or even like mystical religion, like tasawwuf or whatever, something like that. And that they feel like they're having a sort of enchanted experience when they're using technology. And so you don't need God. Your smartphone, or like the person today, it's like, what? I don't need God to provide for me. Like before, you'd say, okay, Allahu yabsutu rizq liman yasha. Allah Ta'ala will provide for us all of our provision. Now you say, well, no. DoorDash provides for me. So if I want food, I go to DoorDash. If I need to fulfill my hawa, my shahwa, I can go to pornography, right? I can just view everything that I want. So this device gives me this, and I think you saw it. What's that, the Diary of the CEO? He had those AI guys on there where Elon Musk, as part of his Grok AI, released a couple of AI characters that are interactive. One's called Annie. So it's just like, the character looks like a little anime doll, and you can talk to her in real time and she will react to you. And so he said something to her like, oh, like, do you want to meet my friends? And she said, oh, do you want me to slip into something more comfortable? It was like literally like pornographically being flirtatious. And they were saying like, this is not by accident. Like they are doing this to enchant and trap people into having these experiences. The way to combat these things is to understand that, this is all of this is underneath the jurisdiction of Allah. So when Allah says, what? قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ مِنْ شَرِّ مَا خَلَقَ. Allah Ta'ala, He has created everything that there is good and evil, and it is all an ibtila. It's all a test, right? And so, some tests are better avoided, altogether. Some we have to go through. So that I'll leave some of these comments, inshallah, up on the website, or rather some of the notes and the feedback for anybody that wants to read deeper on it, inshallah. And we'll continue next week with a few more of the aqa'id from the text. وَنَسَأَ اللَّهَ الْعَافِيَةَ. We ask Allah Ta'ala to forgive us, and for lil-maghfirah, we ask Allah for forgiveness. Lil-hidayah, Allah Ta'ala to give us guidance, inshallah. Allahumma adna ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husna ibadak. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to aid and assist us in being grateful to Him, and to remember Him, and inshallah to be dutiful in our worship to Him. Wa salawatuhu wa salamuhu ala nabiyhi al-kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Barakallahu feekum. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum. Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big illusion.
But the problem is some of these people don't know they're being had, man.
I was just watching the segment on dopamine.